Hello and welcome to This Is MediaCity. I'm Stephen Chapman and today I'm joined on the couch by Kate Squire, who's the Senior Head of Content Production for the North East and the North West. So we will be talking all things local. Kate, welcome to This Is MediaCity. Thank you for popping over the
piazza.
The piazza over here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So Senior Head of Content Production for North West and North East. That's effectively the north of England, isn't it?
It's
really?
the north of England apart from Yorkshire.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's somebody else who does Yorkshire. But yeah, it's literally one coast, from one coast to another. But I would say this, but I really mean it. It's the best bit, because I love it. There's so much character here in the Northwest and just the same in the Northeast. Brilliant sport. I love my sport. And it's just part of the country we need to really shout about.
Fab. We're going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. I also want to know a bit more about you as a person, which is why we start with our icebreaker questions. I've got quite a lot here, so I hadn't realised how much I'd picked up, so hopefully these are all relevant.
Okay.
Have a little go.
All right. This is exciting. I'm just taking one.
Take one to the start and see how you do.
Biggest production nightmare?
Yes, because you worked on all sorts of...
Yes. I have worked on all sorts of things. I've been a presenter in radio and television. So I'll tell you that's come to mind. So I was the sports presenter in Nottingham on East Midlands Today for quite a long time. And so I had a little bit to do with Brian Clough in his later years.
Oh, right.
And if you're a sports fan, you might remember 1991, it was Forest were in the FA Cup final. They'd never won it. They didn't win it. They lost to Spurs. But the next day, on the Sunday, we had a live OB into grandstand, as it was then.
Yeah.
So we had to opt out of grandstand. I'm on the council balcony in Nottingham. There's loads and loads of people cheering and all the rest of it. Cloughie was slightly worse for wear. And I had to interview him live into grandstand and he went off on a complete tangent and I just had to kind of manage it. So that was probably my personal disaster moment, really.
I have a feeling he was probably quite difficult when he wasn't a bit worse for wear.
He was, but, it was quite interesting because being a woman in sport then, in the 90s, was quite unusual. And I had to work quite hard at it. As soon as you knew what you were talking about, he was fine. But he used to give young men also a really hard time. I'm not going to do an impression of him, but... and I actually got the only interview with him before the FA Cup final from anybody.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to talk about your career in sport in a bit, but I'm going to give you one more because that opened up a Brian Clough angle I wasn't expecting then.
Let's go there.
So I'm not trying to persuade you to pick a certain one.
Eat out, take away or cook at home? Well, it's definitely not cook at home. My partner does most of the cooking. I like eating out very much. But I also like a takeaway. Probably the best Friday night evening for me is bottle of wine and a takeaway and snuggled up in front of the telly, frankly.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Fab. Right. Before we go back into your career, because you've done a lot, as we've kind of discussed, you've done a lot of things, but let's talk about your current role everywhere apart from Yorkshire in the north. What does that mean? Is it news, sport? Is it all content? Is it news, sport, audio? What do you cover?
It's all local and regional content. So I've got the two big 6:30 programmes, the television output, so North West Tonight, Look North East and Cumbria. It does overlap a little bit with North Yorkshire. 6 radio stations and all the online and digital output. So it's all local and regional output. And obviously, I've got editors who work to all of those different platforms. But yeah, it's all of that. It's the best bits, actually.
It's that kind of you've got. It's almost that hyper localness that the BBC can do like almost nobody else, I suppose.
Well, when I say it's the best bit, I think it's really important because it's grassroots. It's real people. It's what people really think. and we are closer to audiences than any other bit of the BBC in terms of news and stories and things like that. So, you know, for me, going forward in the world we're in, that's so important, you know.
And I was going to say that importance because I think I did a story a few years ago. I think it was probably during COVID and Brexit and Trump and things like that, that people were starting to not look as international. They were starting to go more local because it was less scary. Is that kind of your reading of it as well?
I think, you know, a lot of research and audience research will show that people are really bothered about what life is like for them where they live. And whilst, you know, we also tell them what life is like in the country and in the world, actually what really matters to them is, you know, health, wealth and family. You know, so what is their local hospital doing? You know, how do they make ends meet? Because it's a real struggle, you know, for an awful lot of people. And they're really connected to their family. And yeah, the world is a scary place, isn't it? And I think if we can help make sense of it and really help people learn and develop locally, that's really important. You know, we champion local people, but we also have a lot of pride in where we live. You know, people like where they live and they don't want to think it's not what it should be, you know, so that's really important too, I think.
And how important has it been, or has it been a key thing to try and evolve local? Because I imagine BBC local radio, I always imagine it's of a certain demographic listen to it. Mm-hmm. How do you get your local message to a slightly younger audience to tie them in there?
Yeah, well, that's the key, isn't it? Yeah. And obviously, you know, we've gone through a big change in the last few years. But I think that it is, you know, I've worked at the BBC a long time. And so I've seen a lot of changes. And what we're going through now in broadcasting is such a phenomenal change of how people are listening and watching and consuming content. And so we've got to move with that. And we have done. And so the changes we've made really have been driven entirely by where audiences are and giving people that value of connecting with them. So that's why we've moved into kind of online and digital content, more audio podcasts, more material on sounds. We've invested in our online indexes, and figures for those are going up and up and up. So we kind of know it's working. And but live radio is still incredibly important. A recent report last week showed the figures are really strong, you know, and our local radio figures are strong. We know that people aren't engaging with linear platforms as much, you know. That's why we have to do that kind of thing. But in terms of trying to get that slightly younger audience, I think sometimes there's a perception problem. You know, that local radio's for your granny or your grandpa. Because actually, if you listen, you know, it's spiky, it's engaging, it's fun. So I think there's something we have to do around that. But it's also how we hook people in through social media. You know, we do a lot now on social media platforms and try and get people, you know, to consume a little bit more. And it's just about getting out and about. We also know sport is a real driver. On local radio and on all our local platforms. So it's about making sure people know what we're doing and when we're doing it. And you know, we have BBC Introducing, which is a fantastic way to get young people in. So I think it's about the content that's relevant to people in their lives. It's about promoting ourselves really well. And it's about knowing the bits that younger people will come in for.
And I'm trying to say this in the right way. So
just say it. Just say it.
Hence the pause. I was Granada Reports,
yep.
And one of the interesting things we found, I was lucky enough to go to the World Cup in 2006 and with a team of 3, and Mike Hall, the reporter, we started out just doing loads of big stories because it's a World Cup. Wow, amazing. But then we started going and like vox popping people, and we had to cover all the regions. So we'd go, we're from Tyne Tees, we're from Granada Reports, we're from your Calendar. And every fan changed immediately because it was something that they knew. Because they recognised presenters, they recognised Mike, or they recognised something. And that, I imagine, is something that well, that's something I've always felt only local can do, regardless of your age. Is that something that still exists there now?
I think so. I think it's a different relationship you have with your local presenter, whether it's on the telly or on the radio, because most of the time they come from the area that they broadcast from. I was thinking about Radio Manchester. I think everybody lives around here, comes from here. And, if somebody is in your front room every night and it's pretty much the same person, you develop that relationship. And we know that from audience research. People will say, well, I might not trust the BBC, but I trust you.
Yeah.
And that is really, really important, I think, and something that we really need to build on. It's a very different kind of relationship.
And there's also the perception that you start out in local radio so that you can go network, which I think also needs to be rethought, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it used to be that then if when your career was going off the boiling net, then you'd come to local radio. That does need to change, because actually, if you work in local, you have a direct impact on people's lives, actually, and the work that is done. And I think that has changed, which I'm really proud of. And there are people, certainly in the newsrooms here, that have spent all their lives here. And that's not because they don't have ambition or passion. It's because they're really good at what they do and they care about people here and where they live. And that's fantastic, I think. And what we also find now is, the big networks, BBC One, News, Sport, they are becoming increasingly connected to what we do, because they realise actually we are really good at it, and those authentic local voices work much better around local stories. So that's beginning to change as well.
And particularly with your patch, less maybe so in the northeast at the moment, but certainly in the northwest recently, having those authentic local voices when we've had these absolutely awful tragedies. Also when we've had amazing football stories, maybe in Newcastle as well. Having those authentic voices changes everything, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We've had some huge and awful stories in the northwest, and I think you can really tell when there's a reporter on network news who comes from here. In the northeast, when Newcastle won the Carabao Cup this year, there was a huge, as you know, great big parade live streamed on BBC, and we had our local reporters there connecting, with the studio in London, and it just worked brilliantly. And network were full of praise for our reporters, because you could throw anything at them. They, authentic voices. It was fantastic. And the same goes for news as well. And the other thing, of course, is we don't disappear after a big story, and that's inevitable. That the big networks come in, they do a terrible story, they go away. We're here all the time with people, for good times, bad times, and I think that's really important, that we do positive stories about areas that can often get a bit of a bad reputation, because they're not like that all the time. And I think people really know that as well, that we don't disappear.
I think we had Lucy Meacock on here a few months ago. We've been on for ages. And she was talking about how kind of after Hillsborough, she was kind of constantly pushing the news desk, saying we just have to keep going back. Is that something that you find with stories that maybe, like, I suppose the arena bomb and things like that, the families are still there, they're still wanting help and things like that? Yeah,
they're still there, and things don't get better for some people. I mean, that was, probably the biggest story that had the biggest impact on me, because I was directly leading teams through that, and that was, for incredible service that we provided, throughout the night, but ongoing, on for weeks and weeks after, and even now, not just around anniversaries, but around individual stories as well. So, and sometimes, you have to shout about those to network, and it's interesting. If I'm being really honest, I find that can be sometimes more of a challenge in the northeast than the northwest. MediaCity being here, and big network departments, the 1 o'clock news, 5 Live, breakfast, really helps.
It helps for the editors based up here, doesn't it?
It does. That really helps. You have to shout a bit louder for the northeast, but that is changing. There's big BBC investment in the northeast as well, in the creative industries. So things are changing, But that's one of my jobs, to shout about these patches, and not only internally at the BBC, but also externally.
Because you arrived in, kind of doing like a reverse backwards in your career, aren't I? But you arrived in Manchester for Radio Manchester.
Yes, Radio Manchester.
Just as MediaCity opened its doors.
Yeah.
So you've probably, the world was changing as you landed. Is that fair to say, in terms of how the BBC and I suppose the UK was looking at how
across
North
the UK
West was?
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a big push to move, a lot of the BBC out of London, and that is really succeeded. I think more than 50% of the BBC is now outside of London. But yeah, it was changing, and I came here, I think, for a meeting. And I just literally, I have to work here. This is the most incredible broadcasting centre, and the energy and the life around it. And I was fortunate enough to get the job as editor of Radio Manchester, which honestly, it was a fantastic role. I love the job I'm doing now. Radio Manchester, very much more hands-on editorial, which I think sometimes all of us in certain positions when you've been hands-on miss a bit. But a fantastic team, and it was, I used to say to people, it's a bit like the Rolls-Royce of radio coming to Radio Manchester, because an incredibly talented team. You never had a problem trying to recruit at Radio Manchester because of MediaCity and its big city and all the rest of it, and the team are fantastic, so I love that. Yeah.
You're never short of a story in the Northwest, are you? You're probably covering national and international stories here regardless, aren't
Absolutely. And that actually brings also its own challenge, because if you are looking to develop original journalism, you have to not remember to do it, but work quite hard at it, because you'd always got breaking stories. You almost didn't need to think about that unless you really did think about it, if you see what I mean. So. And
I suppose you also have to have the different angle, because if the news at 1 or the news at 6 is leading on your story, you need to make sure that yours isn't exactly the same people and everything like that.
Yeah.
So you need to be a pretty good journalist to have got that far.
Yeah.
Right, let's go to right from the start, because otherwise we'll get very confused if we go fully backwards. How you didn't, I mean, obviously you didn't walk straight into management. You are actually a broadcaster to start with. You're one of those people. What was your first step into broadcasting?
Well, when I was at university, I did a sort of a social sciences degree. I didn't know what I wanted to do. My sister was wanted to be a doctor from the age of 6. I didn't have a clue, and I literally thought, oh, radio and television, that sounds like fun. So I did a little bit of research, and I thought there was a studio manager scheme based in London. So it was quite a technical radio mixing job. It still exists, although less so now. But I managed to get on that, and I really worked at that. I went down and shadowed and all that kind of stuff, because I knew it was very competitive. So I got in to do that. Which was brilliant after I graduated. So I was trained, in as a sound mixer, really.
So get your levels right over their production team.
Absolutely. But it was very different then. It was all very linear. It was editing with razor blades, and it was just sounds ridiculous now. But I worked at World Service and a Broadcasting House. Working on all sorts of different programs, and then I kind of want to do a bit more than that. And BBC is a fantastic place for doing attachments to try different things. So that's when I went to World Service Sport, and I did a 6-month attachment there as a producer. Really enjoyed that. And then for reasons of love, I got a job at Radio Leicester as the early morning sports bulletin reader.
Nice.
Right? And now people in London told me this was career suicide. Right? I mean, they literally did. But I started doing that, and so that was quite a different thing for me. I mean, I loved it. And again, it was quite early on in kind of women in sport. And then... How
difficult was that as I mean, nowadays it's not really seen as a thing, but even really recently there's, I can't believe they've got a woman commentating on that football match. And so a bit further... Was that tough, or?
So if I just move a bit further on, I'll tell you one of the tougher things. I mean, I just kind of did it, and I always went into something knowing the background, the knowledge of it. So I never kind of got caught out. I mean, there was quite a lot of sexism from football managers that you'd go and interview, but, you know, life was kind of like that then. I know that sounds awful, but you just kind of glossed over it and carried on. But the best thing I ever did, so I became the television sports reporter on East Midlands Today, which we mentioned a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And one of the best things I did, it wasn't a World Cup, but it was an Olympics. And I got picked to be the BBC regional reporter for the Olympics.
Which one?
That's showing my age. Barcelona.
Oh.
92.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I am that old. But it was just amazing. I was out there for a month, a bit like you, interviewing all the local heroes and appearing on all sorts of regional telly. But there was an assumption that I had got that role through the casting couch.
Oh.
Right, from a few colleagues, which, you know, I remember this colleague of mine coming back and saying, you know what they're saying about you in Birmingham, you know, and I said, right, and I said, what did you say? He said, well, I didn't. I said, thanks a bunch, you know, so that, it,
Nice
you know,
to support,
and of course,
yeah.
absolute nonsense, and I did a fantastic job, but, you know, there was that kind of thing going on that it couldn't be because you were just good at it. Anyway, then I did a little bit at BBC Breakfast, presented the sport for a short time when Jill Dando was there. So this, you know, this is a long time ago, but it was brilliant. And then I just, I did about 8 years of telly, and I kind of wanted to do something different, and I wanted to feel a bit more that I was making decisions that influenced things. So I applied for the editor's job at Radio Nottingham, and I got it. And for the first 6 months, I just thought, what have I done? I hate this. Because I'd gone from being one of us to one of them, you know?
Oh, you've got budgets and decisions to make on personnel and things.
And people, you know, nobody came to talk to you unless they wanted to tell you something about somebody else. They wanted something. You know, nobody just came for a chat or a natter. And I found it quite hard to begin with. Because I hadn't really had any management training and that kind of thing. Anyway, you know, you settle into things, you start to learn, you get some training. And off I went, and I enjoyed that very much. And then I did a big strategic project when at the time we had what we called open centres, and we had digital buses, and I rolled all of that out across England. That was great fun. Then I got the job at Radio Leicester, which is where I'd done a bit of work when I was a student, because I was at university in Leicester, so that was, you know, lovely. But we just moved into a brand new building, or we were in the process of moving to a brand, so that was really exciting as well. Then I did a year as editor of all of local radio, looking across the whole thing, and
the whole of England.
The whole of England, yeah, that was great. And I was quite proud. I did a partnership with Radio 4 where we developed the Listening Project, which is no more, but was a lovely piece of radio. So I did some quite good things. And then, during that time, I knew I was going to have to go back to Leicester, which would have been absolutely fine, because I loved it, because it was an attachment doing that. But that's when I came to Manchester. I thought, I've got to work here. And the job came up here, and I got it. So that was that.
I don't know if I'm allowed to bring this up, but if you are of a certain age, of which I am.
Yes.
Terry Wogan.
Yes.
Used to present a show on the BBC called Auntie's Bloomers.
Oh, yes. That's my last appearance on the television. Yes.
Was it your last?
Well, yeah. Well, because because I'd stopped doing the television and it kept being played at Christmas. And people text me, oh, yeah,
I don't know if I should encourage viewers and listeners to have a look on YouTube, but it's there. Yeah. Take 10, I think it was.
Oh my gosh!
You just started cracking up all the way through an intro. It was a pre-recorded intro, wasn't it?
At that time, we used to record the headlines for the start of the show. I don't know why we did. We don't now, but I don't know why we did. At the time, that was how it was done. This is in the 90s sometimes, so... If you do look, I mean, I've got long hair and there's the most dreadful 90s clothes on. But anyway...
It's of a time, isn't it?
It's absolutely of the time, so please bear with. But anyway, my co-presenter, Quentin Rayner, we just got the giggles, right? And it never happened to me before in that context. And I don't actually know what we were laughing at, but I got to the point where I couldn't even say my name. And I'd got mascara streaming down my face, And the director said, you know, if you don't do it now, we're going to have to do it live. And I knew if we'd done it live, it would have been a complete disaster. So by the time we got to the end, I am literally pinching my wrist, and we just got through it. And then we had to go away and just ignore each other for about 15 minutes, because then we had to come back and do the rest of the programme. And there was nothing I could do to stop giggling. Honestly, it was brilliant but terrible. And then, of course, it's been shown repeatedly on Auntie's Bloomers. But, you know...
I find it a massive shame that those outtakes kind of TV don't properly exist so much anymore. Because I think it humanises the broadcasters a bit, doesn't it, when that happens?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've covered so much. I want to go all the way back to your job again now, to local. With all the changes that are happening, both societally and BBC and everything else, how strong a place are we at with BBC Local? Because I'm not just BBC Local, any local, because we have got these fights with mainstream media. Yeah. We've got, that was in inverted commas for those listening. We've got all this social stuff. How much is that trust of local, and how can we keep the health of it going, I suppose? Well,
look, I think that's the reason why I'm still in it. I think it's more important than ever. I really do. And I think that, you know, we're in this increasingly polarised world, aren't we, where we have extreme views on either side that are the ones that are talked about. Most people, I think, are kind of in the middle. And you know, and so those are the conversations that we need to be having, you know, because there's a lot of people who are worried about the world and what's going on, and we need to be having that open debate and challenging those views and allowing people to have their say. Everybody to have their say, you know, sticking within the law and that kind of thing, but obviously. But, you know, no view should be not talked about within those parameters. And I think that's where BBC Local and Regional really comes into its own, because we're not sanitising views, we're talking about them, and we're allowing that worried middle, if you like, you know, to actually have those conversations. And I just think it's more important than ever, and that whole public service bit is more important than ever. And that's why, you know, the trust in the BBC is really high. I know we get a lot of people saying things about the BBC, but trust is still really high, and that is what we live and breathe by. And you know, in my career and my experience, the amount of work we put into being impartial and trusted, you know, people wouldn't believe the guidelines we work towards. And I often think this, you know, I've worked in senior positions, editorial positions for 25 odd years. No one has ever told me what to do. You know, people think we're influenced by government or whatever. No one has ever told me what to do. I work to the guidelines. We have an editorial policy unit, we have legal advice, you know, and we make our own decisions. We are absolutely independent, and I think that is just so important. And to keep on with that, I think local and regional is hugely important at the BBC. You look at how we're moving towards charter conversations. Local and regional broadcasting is right at the heart of it. And I think that's really important. And I say it with real conviction. I'm a kind of conviction leader. I've been here a long time, and I fundamentally believe in it.
And that idea of that diversity across the UK, of bringing different voices, different backgrounds to kind of get out there.
It's really important. You know, most recently, you know, look at, you know, the kind of debate around flags. We need to have that debate in every single aspect, and have that open discourse, because that's what we're here for. Really important.
Thank you ever so much for coming on This Is MediaCity, and I could talk to you a lot about local, because it's such a massive topic at the moment as well, but thank you ever so much for coming on. Thank you for watching and listening to This Is MediaCity, which is a 39 Pictures production on behalf of MediaCity and in partnership with the University of Salford, and all the team behind the scenes are all graduates and undergraduates from the university. So please remember to like, subscribe, share, and we will see you next week.
The production team are Meg Bond, Tegan Easton, Akila Hewitt and James Young.